So welcome to our first session this morning. Very glad to see so many of you here, particularly after the wonderful night we had last night. As Emily has said, my name is Joanne Powell. I'm Head of Advisory Services at QED, and I'm delighted to see you all here. I'm joined by this amazing panel, and our job today is really to talk about, from shock to strength, how are business schools owning disruption? And I guess really what we're thinking about here is we all deal with disruption, and sometimes things happen very suddenly. Sometimes the disruptions can be quite spectacular, and often they're outside of our control. So really, I think what we're trying to get to is not just how we as organizations absorb the shocks of those disruptions, but how we turn them and grow into something stronger. So really, we're talking about leadership under pressure. And we're talking about how we move forward and how we grow. And I think we're very lucky to have these three panelists with us who have all dealt with this and lived this, often when the normal rules of engagement do not apply. And I'm looking forward to hearing from them. So just briefly to introduce them, we have Olayinka David West, Dean at Lagos Business School in Nigeria. We have Morris Muthumbi from Gibbs in South Africa. And we have Abir Sino from Suleiman Eolayim School of Business at the American University in Beirut in Lebanon. So we're going to start, we've got very short time. I'm going to start by just asking each of the panelists to maybe give us a couple of minutes of the context of the disruptions that they face in their schools. We'll move into a couple of questions, and then we'll open up for Q&A. But Yinka, maybe I could start with you. Could you maybe just talk to us a little bit about the types of disruptions you've seen in Lagos Business School over the last 3 to 5 years and how they've impacted you?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. So, greetings from Lagos, Nigeria, West Africa. Africa's most populous nation, and I think that sets the context. Also a very oil-rich nation. But in 2023, we had a lot of macroeconomic reforms that really tossed the country upside down. The first was the removal of fuel subsidies. And our fuel subsidies, yes, we're an oil-rich nation, a crude oil producer, but we used to import a lot of our petrol. So we had to remove all the subsidies that were from government. And what happened there was inflation skyrocketed, especially food inflation. All the prices and costs went up. So we had to also think about how do we survive as a school and how do we ensure that our staff also survive. The second challenge that happened was now also the foreign exchange reform, which really meant we had to float the naira, which is our local currency, and then that meant the disparity between the black market and the official market closed up, and then the devaluation, the currency devalued by about 300%. So as a business school and as a country that's also very largely import dependent, we had higher costs. So basically, we had higher costs from all different areas, and we had to sort of navigate those choppy waters. So I'll stop there, and then I'll let others share theirs, and then we'll come back to solutions.
Morris, I'm sure you can echo some of what Yinka said, but what have you found in Gibbs?
Good morning, everyone. So I'm not sure what to say. She said she's from the most populous nation. So could I suggest I'm from the bottom of the continent in South Africa?
Bottom of the pyramid, yes.
But we're the most beautiful nation. Would that be fine? So I think we could share our versions of disruption, but you'll find that they're all very similar. The biggest disruption that we experienced is a shared disruption, which is COVID. But what COVID did was accelerate a lot of disruptions that were already in play. So one of the major disruptions was a national political context, where sadly our politics has been broken for quite some time and continues to kind of teeter along, and I think many people in the room would identify with that. Secondly, we then were subject to climate change events, floods that resulted in significant loss of life. Thirdly, we then had national unrest, protests, which also turned extremely violent. And then you add, more recently, the geopolitical context that we face. We are Mr. Trump's favorite toy. So every time he wants to kind of feel strong, he will remember that there is something called South Africa, and he'll kind of take us out and poke us. So we experience all of these things, but what COVID did for us at a school level was it meant that given that the economy wasn't growing and hadn't grown for 10 years, the shape and size of our school was under strain, with the result that our biggest revenue source, which was companies, was starting to dry up, largely because also of the advent of technology. Education became ubiquitous and cheap and free to access. And as a consequence, we had to really reflect on whether do we become a tech player as well? We're largely a residence school. Do we become an online school as well? Or what do we do? Because half our revenue disappeared, accelerated by COVID and all these other factors. There is a positive story at the end, but
we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that.
I'm going to jump into Abir. Abir, as I mentioned at the beginning, is from Lebanon, and I attended a talk that Abir gave a couple of years ago, and I was struck that of all the countries I've ever gone to or dealt with, Lebanon seems to have had every possible crisis going.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So the thing is, while I was listening to my friends here, and I was like imagining myself holding a deck of cards and trying to think, okay, so which card should I play? Because I have them all. You just name one. And the thing is, every time, most of the time, when disruption is discussed on the table, my colleagues seem to be raising 1-2 single events. And although now I hear a lot of very interesting ones, I realized that my context is a lot of overlapping and compounding ones. And I mean, over the past 5 years, AUB has been navigating through an economic crisis. And by economic crisis, I mean an inflation that reached 270%. It's one of 210% among the top inflation rates globally. The lira devaluated by 97%. We lost quite a good value of the money. We had to survive through, political paralysis. We had to go through infrastructural breakdown, where the capacity for the supply for energy was down to 3 to 4 hours a day across the country, and this put a lot of pressure on institutions / individuals, because we had to scramble and look for alternative sources of energy in a country that was already struggling. And most recently, we missed the war, so we got the war at the end, and now we had to deal with the war. And then, I mean, one thing that we had to do is actually navigate our accreditation visits through the war, switching online at the 11th hour, trying to figure out how to use the grid, the internet grid. I mean, we had faculty and staff connecting from home on a very fragile network, and only 3 of us could actually make it to campus just to make sure we actually got it running. I mean, I could go on and on the so many things we had to struggle through, but I guess I'll leave it at that. I don't want to impress you anymore.
I'm not sure she even mentioned the explosion in Beirut.
Oh no, oh yeah, I forgot that one. So, I mean, it's always a struggle. But again, I think it's part of our institutional approaches to actually deal with these disruptions. I'll tell you more maybe later.
But listening to her, I was just thinking, and I'm sure you would agree, Inka, this energy shortage thing. We didn't mention it, both of us, because I think we've just taken it for granted, right? Yes. And also just listening, like income inequality and all of these things, we could list 10 more things that would be shocking for many. But again, I suppose the fact that we are not indicates how we have also found a way to say, okay, that's the new normal. How do you navigate that new normal?
Well, that's been my new normal for 30, 40 years.
Correct, yeah.
So we run on generators in Nigeria, so we don't know when we have grid power or when we don't. I think generator is our stable source.
And I panic if we have a power cut for 30 minutes. So it's different, I guess, different strokes. I think we often, when we're talking about disruption, we talk about all the things that help us to react and to survive. So maybe what I'd like to do is to just take that one step further and ask maybe, Maurice, we might start with you this time, something that you're doing well now that you might not have been doing had it not been for some of these crises? And I'm going to make it difficult and say you're not allowed to use COVID as your crisis.
Okay. So I'm going to maybe speak, because we had at a conference with an accreditation body, and speak something that could be relevant. In terms of really becoming a global school, it's always been an ambition of ours. We're young school, we're 25 years old, and being a global school means being able to attract international students, being able to attract international faculty members or academics, being globally connected with other schools in terms of exchanges, research, and so forth. And I must say that even though I'm not using COVID, but during this period, what we realized was, in order for us to really separate ourselves and become relevant, we needed to take this very seriously. And so what we decided to do was to invest in quality in our school. With the result, for example, over the past 3 years, we've been able to increase the percentage of international academics from 3% to 20%.
Wow.
In 3 years. And we don't cheat like the Europeans, because when the Europeans cheat and they say, I'm in Germany, and so somebody in Belgium is international. I mean, you can take a train ride between these two cities. That's not international. You need to travel at least 6 to 8 hours by flight to feel international. So our international faculty...
Is Africa not just one country, no?
No, Africa is not one country. No. So our international faculty have to travel at least 6 to 8 hours to get to us, and then change country and so forth. So that's an important point. And get a visa, yes. Our international students, we increased from about 5% to 15%. And in order to do that, we said we needed to be a lot clearer about where we want to distinguish ourselves. And so we started distinguish ourselves, saying many African businesses are becoming uncompetitive. Okay. How do we then produce learning solutions that would make them more competitive globally? And the answer when we spoke to our community was, we don't just want leadership and management capability, we want leadership and management in specific areas. So we needed to move into the world of science, into the world of technology, into the world of environment. And so we started hiring scientists to join our business school, started hiring anthropologists to join our business school, so that we could become more relevant in the product and value proposition. So all the numbers that I mentioned are a result of us listening to our community, pivoting, shifting our value proposition, and with the result, last comment, is that our revenue not only came back, it has doubled to when, so we went backward 50%, we went up 50%, and then we doubled again, and the consequence was in pivoting the product value proposition as a function of listening to your customer base.
Thanks, Mark. It's a really interesting perspective. And Abir, I wonder, does any of that resonate with you?
Oh, definitely. As a matter of fact, yes. The thing is, well, it does resonate, but there's another added element for us, because what really helped us, what really worked for us during the crisis is the fact that we turned inwards. When adversity hit, we just reflected inwards. We looked at our mission. We tried to practice the power of introspection. And what we did was we had clarity on mission. We had clarity on where we want to head and what we want to do. Paradoxically, crisis gave us coherence. It brought us closer together, closer to our stakeholders. So I think if something really worked for us, I think the crisis is working for us, not just against us. So that's how we looked at it.
It's funny, the image that comes to mind, and it's one I've used recently. It's like a landslide. You're on a journey, there's a landslide. And once you know where your final destination is, you find the workaround, but you need to know where that final destination is going to be. Yinka, how about you?
Well, generally, I think there is nothing like an opportunity in a crisis, and we need to think about that. But one thing is that as business schools, we seem to think that we're immune from some of these shocks. And I think from COVID to macroeconomic shocks, we learned that, you know what, things can happen. And these are things we teach. So it now became a matter of practice what you preach, right? So for us, it was some of the impacts of the macroeconomic shocks were that we had a talent migration, a brain drain migration. So Nigeria and some other African markets started producing the workforce for the the first world countries in that. Again, aging populations, again, very young populations in Africa. So we saw a talent scarcity in the business space. So what we decided to do was, how do we help organizations rebuild their talent pools faster? Because organizations were bleeding, teams were leaving to Canada, to the UK, high school visas and things. So we said, let's do that. The second one was also, as a business school, we also had to be that convener of conversations. In macroeconomic reforms, the government seems very distant from the business community. So how do we start to bring people together and have conversations? How do we start to position our research from an evidence base to say, what do we need to do to ensure that we're informing some of these policies and the implementation of these policies to ensure that the shocks are not as big on the population? So we started playing that role, and that really is important because you're bringing business communities together, you're bringing government, and then that also opens up transparency, so they have access to government officials and can have conversations and questions. And I think finally, the good thing for us was also, because things became more expensive, so did foreign education. So a lot of Nigerians now started to look within and say, you know what, why do I need to go to Bradford? Why do I need to go to the UK for my education? I can actually do it within. So we had a surge in our applications and in our pool of systems. But I think all in all, it's really about internal strengthening systems. How do we build the resilience internally to ensure that from a people perspective, from a workforce perspective, from a culture perspective, we have the right systems? Unfortunately for us, we didn't lose any of our own talent, actually. So other people lost talent, but we didn't. Thank you.
That's really interesting, and I want to pivot off that because in yesterday, I think it was the final session yesterday, Matt Simmons made reference to the importance of core values during periods of disruption and whether these act as that they're important. And I think he mentioned academic freedom, he mentioned research integrity and a few others. And it got me thinking about the role of values and whether values and being very aware of what your values are as an institution, as an organization, whether they provide a bedrock of stability that allow you to move forward more easily in times of crisis rather than just merely surviving. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious on your take on that particular perspective.
I would say definitely, because when you think about your people and I think faculty are one asset, but also your professional staff are another big asset, because we can't do anything without them. That ensuring that you've got their back and the organization is not going to leave them stranded. Because when we talk about inflation and higher costs, one of the things is that they also needed higher salaries and higher wages. So you had to be very, very reactive to those, but also ensuring that we now had to adopt things like, okay, maybe a 3-day work week rather than the commutes for some of them, because transportation costs also increase. So having an organization that empathized was very important, and ensuring that they felt as part of the belonging, and then their needs were taken after. They were also more committed into pulling in the extra hours and doing more when time required it.
Can I flip that more? Morris, in your organization, what are you not talking about in your leadership area that you think or might become your next big risk?
Oh, she always has the difficult questions for me.
I promised Morris I was going to land him in it, so now this is my opportunity.
I think it would be the same in most organizations, whether it's a business school or a business, and that is, I suppose, the word courage, and not naive courage.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear here. So if you take what many higher education leaders have had to navigate whether you are navigating how you talk about what's happening in Ukraine, or how you talk about what's happening in Israel and Palestine, or how you talk about today what's happening globally in terms of how leaders are responding. I think we're not having courageous conversations about the kind of leadership we need to be and the kind of leadership we as business schools have contributed to, because the leaders that are causing the chaos, many of them came through us as a community. And I think it's all fine and well for us to speak about all the positive impact we have on society, but we do need to reflect also about the negative impact that we also have in society. And so that we can then go back to reflect about the curriculum, both the formal curriculum, what we teach in the classroom, and the informal curriculum, what happens outside of the classroom. So connecting a little bit, I'm cheating, to the values conversation. What we think is important is that we should really be teaching business people to have a sense of history, to have a sense of perspective, to have a deep understanding of culture and cultural differences. And very few business schools are doing that. And because if we can talk about empathy, but if we're not teaching people about the benefits of empathy, what empathy looks like, what respect and humility and accountability looks like, we shouldn't be surprised if we continue to produce what I would call irresponsible leaders who are interested in their own self-interest, as opposed to really understanding that we're part of a broader community. We are a part of society, not apart from society. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Abir, do you want to add anything before we go to audience Q&A?
Well, just one thing. Going back to Yinka's point about the brain drain. I mean, we in Lebanon we suffered a lot of that. We lost around 20% of our youth due to either immigration or relocation, and the school has been working. Well, they kind of adopted 2 strategies to retain and regenerate human resource. So when it came to faculty, we had a lot of support schemes there, and we made sure that these support schemes, not just faculty, actually faculty and professional staff, to make sure we are there for our people as well. We also had like strategic recruitment on the international level. We made sure it remained open, it remained active, just to make sure we kept people coming in. We also leveraged our diaspora because we have alumni across the globe, so we could actually tap into these resources to get our people back in. So that seemed to be working very good. I mean, even now we're still in crisis, but we've almost exceeded the number that we had pre-2020. I mean, throughout the crisis, we've been able to bounce back. I think it's all about realizing the value that we're creating as a business school. It's not just the leaders that we develop or the education that we provide. Oops, what did I drop?
Okay, it's on your phone.
Sorry.
You're fine.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to take a break now and maybe move on to some audience Q&A. We'd ask you, please, if you have a question, to wait until a microphone reaches you. I think there's some members of the AMBA team with microphones ready to go. So do we have any questions for the panel?
Good. Okay, there's one at the
This one down there, middle towards the back. There's a microphone on the way. I feel like singing Run Rabbit, Run Rabbit, Run, Run, Run.
Good morning and thank you. I'm Richard Longman from the Open University in the UK. I wonder, Maurice, I was particularly interested in what you were talking about, courageous conversations, and I wonder what you and your colleagues are doing to own your part of the disruption in the climate crisis.
Great question.
Thank you. So, Richard, thank you so much. So if I understand what Richard is saying, Richard is referring to South Africa being one of the largest emitters, carbon emitters in the world. To put in context, Africa, the whole continent, not a single country, the whole continent with 54 countries, we contribute an insignificant amount as a continent. Less than 3% of the carbon emissions in the world come from Africa. 2 countries contribute about 50% of that. That is South Africa and Egypt. Okay? So that's fine. We acknowledge that. But there's a historical context. This is a function of the colonial history that we have. So then we're in conversations with our partners. It's a polite way of saying the people that stole from us, to say, how do we work together to redress the consequences of eons, of generations of you taking our resources and building beautiful towers in your country where you are now able to be further ahead in your conversations around climate change. So what we then do is, Richard, we have a conversation with our companies through programs that we run at Gibbs to talk to them about the difference between climate mitigation strategies and climate adaptation strategies, also taking into account the effects of the environmental adaptation. So we teach our leaders about how to use our environment as a carbon sink, which means how do you absorb the carbon through environmental strategies that they need to invest in. And then we teach them about how you could have a just transition in your oil and gas, just transition in your coal strategies, whilst also making sure you are looking after the people that would be significantly displaced if you didn't have a just transition, so that we don't have to have the difficult conversations that are now taking place in other parts of the world where people who are not included in the conversation end up shaping the conversation. So we want to make sure we are all moving along together. So inclusivity to us means we don't take a narrow or a binary approach to this conversation. We take a much more inclusive and a responsible and empowering approach to this conversation. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks. Any more questions? Yeah, we've got 2 in the center here. The lady in the yellow was just first, and then 2 rows behind just afterwards.
The lady in yellow is Danisa. We need to know who she is.
Thank you very much. I would like to, I'm Danica Pulk from Slovenia. I would like to ask Morris, you said rightly that we should have more lectures and more knowledge, give more knowledge about the history in order to understand the situation. I also think that we should give more like new political order in the world, you know, and orders, how it is, also to understand better. So what we are doing in our school is to mix these two. You invite somebody because the executives with whom we deal, they are not really ready to listen to the lectures out of history. But you can invite somebody very important, well-known, and then this person has a lecture on actual situation, and then, of course, interweaves some historical understanding. So I think that I agree with you. I mean, not I think, I agree with you, but it is very big art how to do that. I would like to hear more about that. And I have a question for the lady from Beirut.
Abir?
I would like to know how are you dealing now with this situation with American new wave, let me say like that. Do you have problems because of that? Thank you very much.
I'll be very quick because I want to hand over to you, Abir. We use case studies, so we don't stand up and lecture to people. We bring case studies, and through the case study method, you involve them, and the students become part they become actors in the conversation, and they're solving the problem as if it's alive today, and it works very well.
Abir?
Well, for me to answer quickly within the time frame, well, first of all, it gave us a big hit, the recent American thing, because funds were withdrawn. We had to deal with major fund cuts, but the university has been able to raise funds. We've been putting a lot of structures and systems and policies just to try to mitigate whatever we had to deal with from these changes in policy. But again, I mean, these changes were not completely unanticipated. We kind of we were prepared a little bit earlier when it came to understanding what's coming. So it wasn't really as much of a surprise. We had the dynamic and agility in the institution to actually just circle around, reframe things, be able to just stand back and come up with solutions. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Do we have time for one very quick last question? Because there was one just behind over here. If you want to raise your hand again. And I'll ask you, please, if you could keep your question really concise, and ditto for the response. So we're watching the clock.
So if you were a dean of a top 10 Financial Times school, what were the trends? What would be the trends in emerging markets, business schools that you would be looking at?
Anybody? Yinka, do you want to go first?
Well, I think I'll be looking at student mobility and student flows in general to understand what's going on in that demand space, and not assume that as a business school you're sort of taking it all, because again there's the argument of, do I want a master's in business or a traditional master's? So student flows. Morris?
Very quickly, Morris, if you
I would say look for opportunities for a different kind, but a deeper collaboration, which results in a win-win for your school and the country that you're looking at, or the schools in that country, because currently many of the top schools have an extractive relationship as opposed to a regenerative relationship with the countries and the schools they operate in, they engage with in the emerging market. So go for a regenerative, not an extractive relationship.
And Abir?
Actually, I'd add to what Maurice just said by build stronger ties with stakeholders in your ecosystem. I mean, partnerships can go way deeper and a lot more on reciprocal. Thank you.
So maybe if I just take a moment just to finish up. I think what we've seen here is that disruption, it can be a pivot and an inflection point for actually not just surviving, but for moving forward and doing a lot more. And I was particularly, I think, liked the comments that we've had from the panel around values and around courageous conversations and around repivoting and thinking. What I would like to do is, I hope you've all had one thing you can take away from the conversation that you can bring back. But if I might just add one question that you could think about. If Amber BGA were to turn around overnight and measure your school on how you're embracing disruption to thrive, how would you score yourselves? And could I just ask you maybe just to give a show of appreciation to our incredible panelists, and thank you very much.